Good afternoon, everyone. We will get started momentarily. I see folks are still joining the meeting. So in the meantime, if you could utilize the chat, please introduce yourself and let us know what city you're joining from, and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Parent Advocacy Lunch and Learn. So my name is Candace Weber. I work at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and we serve as an independent source of data, research, and information for policymakers, businesses, educators, families, and communities so that they all understand and can act on the issues related to early care and education for young children aged birth to 4 in Louisiana. So this event is part of Louisiana Early Ed Month, which is a month-long series of events to raise awareness about the critical issues surrounding early care and education that impact children, parents, and caregivers in our state. Today's training is co-hosted by us, the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, and Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. These are both two statewide organizations that are committed and diligently working for the betterment of Louisiana and its children. In fact, at the Policy Institute, we've traveled and held events throughout the state this month and have met with elected officials and business leaders about the importance of increased investment in our young children. And today, we are thrilled to bring together all of you, our parents, our grandparents, caregivers, guardians, and those who are just interested in early education from all across Louisiana to learn how to be the best advocate for your children, the children in your community, and the children in our state. And so at this time, I am delighted, and it is my honor to introduce your host for this afternoon, Billy Anderson from the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Power Coalition is a coalition of organizations united under power, and the Policy Institute is an anchor partner. And so the Power Coalition equips Louisianans with all the tools in the toolbox to fight for equity and justice. And so we know after today's training, you will be ready to advocate for Louisiana's youngest learners. In fact, very soon after this training, you will receive a follow-up email with opportunities to put your advocacy training into practice by using your voice in support of Louisiana's young children. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Billy, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Candace, so much for that warm welcome. And good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our parent advocacy training. Again, my name is Billy Anderson, and I'm the North Louisiana organizer for the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. I will serve as your host this afternoon. The Power Coalition for Equity and Justice is a statewide civic engagement table that focuses on advocating on issues that directly impact marginalized communities. The Budget Project monitors and reports on public policy and how it affects Louisiana low to moderate income families. The Budget Project believes that the lives of Louisiana families can be improved through profound change in public policy. Go Far Louisiana, a coalition of partners, parents, and providers that central tenets are a family and provider-driven system, a net that works, a healthy start, childcare for everybody, everywhere, and family-friendly workplaces. This training will give you the opportunity to ask elected officials your questions about how to stay engaged as a parent, to learn how to find and contact your elected officials, and to get informed about upcoming opportunities in your community to support early care and education. So we have a few housekeeping notes. I want to take a moment to recognize Entergy, Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice for your sponsorship and centering children. During this afternoon's events, for the remainder of the week, we invite you to share your participation on social media using the hashtag LA Early ED Month. That's again, hashtag LA Early ED Month. This training is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook. So thanks to all who are joining us in the various watch parties going on. If you're watching on Zoom, please remain on mute until we enter breakout rooms. And if you ever want to refer back to the conversation, you will always be able to find this recording on the video section of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children's YouTube page. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Morgan, to introduce our elected officials.
Thank you so much, Billy. Our first elected official, I'm not sure if you all have had the, not sure if you all have had the pleasure of seeing former Representative Pat Smith while she was conquering in our legislature. She is a cheerleader for equity and justice. She served our legislator for quite a long time, I believe from 2008 up until most recent, maybe 2019 or 2020. And so I would like to introduce to some, but reintroduce to others, former Representative Pat Smith. Representative Smith, let me stop sharing so we can see you. Let's take you off of mute.
Well, good morning to everyone, and it's such a pleasure to be here, seeing all your lovely faces and able to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And I also see some of my other colleagues there that are always working on education, no matter what grade level it is. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I was elected to the legislature in 2008, served 12 years, that's the 3 terms. And for those entire terms, I was on the education committee. My experience in dealing with early education actually started when Bobby Jindal became aware that we needed to do something about early childhood and created an advisory committee to begin to look at how to increase the efforts of not only our education groups, but also of outside groups who are working on early education measures. You know, on the education committee, we actually would get reports from our State Department of Education, and continuously we saw that there were failures in our system, that children were not coming to school kindergarten ready, or even able to know what really was school all about. So what I determined at that time was that we needed to have more information about access for parents, access for children, and they have to have transportation to get to where they're going, and that we needed good parental education about early childhood. Why do our children need early childhood education? It was a stretch, but we were short on money. That committee that formed at that time gave the foundation for the early childhood movement in Louisiana. But again, having a movement with no money was very hard, because we did have ideas about how to put it forth, but unfortunately the money just wasn't there for us to continue what we needed to continue. CCAP was not being funded as it should be, and it's now being funded more as that right now, but there was just no money to be put into early childhood. And it was a buzzword that needed to be brought to the forefront of everybody's mind, because going to school doesn't start at 3rd grade. It starts at 0. We began to learn about, and through my involvement with SREB, the Southern Educational Regional Committee there as a vice chair and as a member, I learned more about the brain development than I think most people had known at the time, and was very, very interested in seeing how we could make critical changes in Louisiana. At that time, we were doing daycare centers. We had a lot of daycare centers. We didn't have any of the thrusts that needed to help our children go forth in being educated while they were being watched by someone or by a group that had a daycare center. So the change began during that period of time to look at how, from the State Department of Education's perspective, to look at how they were going to be able to change daycares to learning centers. And a plan was put together where many of those groups became interested in seeing how kids were to be educated while they're being cared for within a child care learning center or other places that like family child care providers who are at home taking care of 6 or less children. And it's been a struggle, but I'm very glad to know that since this administration has taken the big leap in putting money into early childhood education, that there are some interesting things that are happening. However, we always have to be cautious of some of the bills that come forth in the legislature regarding early ed. Everybody in the legislature, everybody in the state need to recognize that no child begins to read at 3rd grade. None. They begin to read when they are born. And that's interesting that people don't realize that, but parents can play a vital role in their children while in the womb by reading to them, by playing music. And those are the things that are important to children beginning to learn prior to going to kindergarten or pre-K. And so those were the things that we brought back to the legislature. Steve Carter and I were very connected on that issue of early childhood education and really knew that we needed to do something different as well. So the money that's been put into our early childhood education programs now is really not enough. There's still more money needed to be expanded to early childhood education, whether it's the learning centers, whether it's the CCAP money, whether it's the child care workers, which in fact we are at a very low number of child care workers in the state of Louisiana. And we need to make sure that when a child care center or learning center opens, that they have the ability to not only provide the education, but the people to be able to take care of that, those programs that they want to put in and that they get from the State Department of Education. And I'm working with a nonprofit as well on early childhood education, but it's a unique one. It's not a brick and mortar. We find parents in the housing authority places and we go to them. So we meet parents and children where they are, 0 to 4, and then also at that age of 28 months to 16 months to 28 months to begin to expand their educational opportunities while they're at home, being cared for by a parent or guardian. And it's so important that we all realize that this is the foundation of getting our state to where it needs to be. It's not anything else but making sure that our children who are going into kindergarten, no matter where they go, going into early childhood, have some background of early childhood care. And I've been advocating for this since I left the legislature as well, and did it when I was in the legislature. And it's very, very important. And as I said, working across party lines was so important to be able to let other folks understand the importance of early childhood education and be able to make some efforts and some ground rules and how we are to make sure our children are being educated and ready to enter kindergarten ready. It's so important that parents, guardians, grandparents, all who are dealing with children have an opportunity to get involved with their legislature. That's not easy for a lot of people. They just don't have the not only the opportunity, but many of them fear talking to legislators because they sometimes feel like they're not welcome to do that. But it is important because you can write letters, you can actually visit the legislature, you can go to their office, and you can also send emails. It is important that parents who are in this venue, who are in this point of time of having early childhood education be top of mind to everybody in this state, that we begin to do that. Legislators need to realize they need to be welcoming those parents and those advocates for early childhood education into their realm of thought. And if they don't do that, then they miss out on a lot of opportunities on being able to determine what is the right angle, what is the right way, what are the right rules, what are the things that we need to be doing first and foremost to get our children kindergarten ready. And I'm just excited of the things that I've seen so far, of being able to go to where parents are and being able to teach them how to teach their children. And that's so important. Parents have to be the first teachers of their children, and that's what our program does. So I would like to see so many more programs like this in the state of Louisiana in Baton Rouge area and all over, because number one, our children, I'm not going to give you all the statistics because I don't know them all, but I do know this. We have a low percentage of children, 0 to 3-year-olds, who are being underserved. And there's even more between 3 and 4, being underserved in our educational involvement for parents and children. And until we crack that nut and be able to get those parents and children involved some way, then we're not going to make inroads on how we change our educational system. And I'm hoping that all of you that are listening to this will become some of the cheerleaders for early ed. I know you already are, but it takes a little bit more than just talking. We've got to be able to make sure that our voices are heard, that the plans that are being prepared for our children and parents are dissected so that you know what they're actually trying to do in early childhood education. And if it's not right, we need to let them know it's not right. And one of the things I know is not right, we don't have enough people meeting parents where they are. And that is so important, because a parent needs to feel that they are the leaders in making sure that their children are being educated. We're not going to reach all of them, we know that. But the most important thing is we've got to try to make sure all of these children and all these parents have the opportunity to be able to talk to someone, to work with an organization, to talk to whomever it is who's going to make their child's journey to education, so that they're not being held back in 3rd grade, so that they are definitely ready in kindergarten by knowing their name, their address, the colors, their numbers, so that they can move forward in education. And we won't have these reports coming out continuously about, as we know now, our children don't read, a large percentage don't read at 3rd grade level. And I'm sure all of you have heard the statistics of the pipeline to, from educational pipeline to prison. And what we've heard is that they base it on 3rd grade children who are not reading. We've got to stop that cycle. And you don't stop it at 3rd grade, you stop it at 0 to 4. And I'm hoping that everybody here is going to take an opportunity in some way to voice that option to our legislators, to make them understand that it's just not rhetoric about our children being the foundation of our state moving forward. They definitely are the foundation, and we've got to work hard to make sure that they understand that.
Thank you so much, former Representative Smith. And you all can see how much of a champion Representative Smith was at the legislature and is outside of the legislature, and doesn't necessarily stop. And we're really getting a lot of these gems from someone who essentially was an OG in the legislature. And so not only on education, but also criminal justice reform. So you heard how she tied that in and what the mile markers are. You also heard about how it is our duty, it is our right to have conversations with all elected officials, not just the ones that you voted for. And the Power Coalition, that's what we say, a power voter holds their elected official accountable. And Representative Smith just gave us some really great gems. And so we're going to have a Q&A because I know the questions are coming. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Representative or Councilwoman, Banks, Shauna Banks. Did I let you in? I'm going to do her intro while I'll get her queued up. Shauna Banks is a native of Baton Rouge, went to Southern, received her bachelor's from Southern, and also a master's. And she is employed with the East Baton Rouge school system and represents Council District 2. So let me see, Councilwoman Banks, are you on here? Oh, she's joining. Okay, that's okay. Let's just pivot really quickly. I've already done her introduction, but we'll pivot to Dr. Belinda Davis, who's an associate professor of political science at LSU. She serves on the Louisiana Board of Early Childhood and Secondary Education. She's also a parent of 3 boys and who are in the public school system in East Baton Rouge. She got involved in education policy at the local and state level over a decade ago, and she was appointed to the board by John Bell Edwards. And so Dr. Davis, can you come off mute?
I think I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about Bessie's role in early childhood education, and then what I can encourage you as parents of young children to do to help us make good decisions. So several years ago, early childhood education was moved under the purview of the Department of Education, which means that Bessie has a larger role in policy now surrounding early childhood education. One of the key things that we are doing right now is the revision to the early childhood education standards. So essentially what has to be taught to children in their centers. And unfortunately, those early childhood standards have become a little bit of a political hot potato. And so essentially what Bessie did was, is what we do with all standards. We convened a committee of experts in early childhood education to come up with standards. What are the things that we know that children need to learn in their centers between 0 and 5 in order to show up ready to learn for kindergarten? And we had a great panel of experts who brought those standards back to Bessie. And unfortunately, those standards have gotten caught up with all of the craziness surrounding critical race theory and the conflicts there. And so we have a group of parents who I believe mistakenly think that social emotional learning, which is in our standards now, and is in the new standards, which social emotional learning is essentially teaching young children how to regulate their emotions and how to interact with others, both their teachers and their peers. It's critical to the development of young children. But some individuals and groups have basically decided that social emotional learning is somehow a Trojan horse for bringing critical race theory into early childhood education. And nothing could be further from the truth. And so we're right now in the process of that committee of experts meeting again and listening to the voices of the folks who are concerned about social emotional learning in the standards. And then they will this committee will bring those standards back to Bessie in the coming months. And so I would just like to encourage you as parents. As a Bessie member, I hear a lot from educators, from directors of centers, and from experts surrounding their support for the standards, their support for social emotional learning. What I would love to see are more parents of young children talking about what their children have gained from social emotional learning inside the centers that they attend. So that would be one thing that we would love to see. And then the second thing I'll just tell you that is concerning is kindergarten readiness in the state of Louisiana. We have seen an increase in the number of students that are showing up for kindergarten not ready to learn. And what I believe those numbers show us is how important early child care and early childhood education centers are to us, because we saw so many of those centers close down during COVID. And as a result of that, we have 3 and 4-year-olds that were deprived of quality access to early childhood education centers. And so we are seeing the consequence of that. And in particular, we have seen a narrowing of the gap but in readiness between free and reduced lunch children or economically disadvantaged children and middle and upper income children, which just really points out that early childhood education is important for all kids regardless of their income bracket. And so it's my hope at this next legislative session that we're going to see our legislators embrace more spending on early childhood, which is critical. And I hope that we will help them avoid this idea that we have to have some choice between funding early childhood and funding K-12 education, because that is a false choice. A state that really cares about the lives of their children funds their education from birth all the way through college, and we should not be pitting those groups against each other. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And please, you and Representative Smith, please stay on for just a tad bit longer while we hear from Councilwoman Banks. But also we have some really great questions percolating in the chat. Councilwoman Banks, there you are. How are you? I did your intro already, but I'm gonna do it again just because you deserve to hear it. And so a native of Baton Rouge, graduated from Southern with 2 degrees, a bachelor's in science and also a master's in education. She is employed by the East Baton Rouge school system and represents Metro Council District 2. And so Representative Banks, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I tell you, I'm getting worse by the more technology that is advanced, the dumber I get. But it is a pleasure to be among your panelists and all the parents that are out, hopefully grasping all the wealth of information that is being shared today. So good afternoon to everyone. Though I am in the school counseling, mental health, mostly my job with East Baton Rouge Parish is with the most difficult populations, and the age is usually middle to high school. So I don't have a lot of information as it relates to early education. However, I see the results of, and the negative results of middle and high school students that appear to not have had an advantage or exposure to early childhood education, with the deficits that we see not only as it relates to the ABCs of learning, but also, we keep talking about the SEL, the social emotional learning, which is a fancy word, but our kids are traumatized at a very early age. And so what we're seeing and what I see every day in my school system, every day we're dealing with children that usually are part of the juvenile justice system, having been adjudicated, dealing with kids that are part of our expulsion sites with EDR readiness, junior and even elementary school, and currently at Northdale Academy, which is a middle to high school for students that are at least 2 years behind. And so what I experience as it relates to the deficits is many of these kids did not even go to school, not only in early education, but even sporadically, even during the elementary and those other formative years that would set a baseline for their continued success. And it is difficult to separate the early education experience without talking about the early family dynamics that many of the children that I see, the students that I see, because when I'm talking to them, when I'm counseling, those stories do begin at age 4 and 5, whether it is where many of us as children may remember hide and seek. And as innocent as that was, but the stories that I hear of hide and seek in 4 or 5, and sometimes were set up for sexual exploitation. We know about running to the store to pick up sugar from the next door neighbor. But when I talk to my students, they are running to the neighbor to drop off marijuana to do a drug deal. So with those kind of experiences, imagine the impact of trying to teach them the ABCs. So it is so important that we have a way to get to the most disconnected parents, to let them know how important it is for their children to be in either formative or informal early education settings, and how important it is to connect while the students that we find that have many of these same maladaptive behaviors and dynamics, that we are explaining and connecting with family team conferences, with parents, to know where there's linkage between what is happening at home and how the students, how the brain grows, and how those experiences and those, in some cases, trauma, are leading to all the other issues that our children are facing, from, early education to 12th grade, if they make it that far.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Banks. And so we have a couple of questions in the chat. So if all of our speakers, Dr. Davis, Representative Smith, can come off of mute just in case the question is for you. Now, this first question is for Miss Belinda, as they said in the chat. For the Louisiana standards proposed or being implemented, such as the social emotional learning for daycares, is there a way we would be able to see a breakdown of what's proposed each year, or where can we find that online?
So for the early childhood education standards, you can find them in the Bessie board docs. So our meetings are archived. So you can go to louisianabelieves.com and then click on Bessie. And then there is a link to our meetings, and you can see archive documentation. And so that would have been, you could find them in our January meetings. And so they're broken down by their various, various indicators, including social emotional learning, and how centers will approach that from age 0 all the way to age 5.
Thank you so much. And we are going to share this recording out with people, and we'll also have it on like YouTube and things like that, so that we can reference back in there. But can you just give us that website one more time? And then maybe Victoria, you can write that into the chat for people so they can just copy and paste it.
It's louisianabelieves.com. That's the State Department of Education's website. And then up at the top, there should be a link for Bessie. So BESE. And then when you go there, you'll see there will be a link for our archived meetings, and it will be located in the January Bessie meeting packet.
All righty, thank you so much. The next question that we have, and it's not attributed to anybody, but whomever would like to answer. How do you go about speaking with a director of a child care center that says she just hopes teachers show up, when a therapist suggests different interventions to the teacher and the teacher does not want to use them? My child is also in a 1-year-old class when he should be in a 2-year-old class, and the teacher is more reactive than proactive. There's a shortage of teachers. How do we go about fixing this? And so we also got that question a lot. We understand nationally is a teacher shortage, and whatever's happening national is going to be a symptom of what's happening on the state and local level. And there is a teacher shortage. And so I would, anyone that can kind of answer this around the lack of teachers and suggestions, and teachers really being overwhelmed and being reactive instead of proactive. Some things that we do ask for are fair pay and paying folks what they're worth. These are the architects of brain design. And so if it was like a brain surgeon, we'd be paying them $500,000 a year, and yet we're struggling to pay teachers at child care centers minimum wage. And we've also fought minimum wage really long with Representative Smith. So anyway, what do we say? They're not talking to me, they're talking to y'all, so they didn't ask me the question. What do we do about this teacher shortage? How do we go about fixing this?
I'll start take a stab at it. I know that in the strategic plan for EBR, it was talked about as far as the teacher shortage and how to get through some of those barriers that we have. And you're right, the barriers definitely have to do with not only the time frame that people have to go into getting an associate degree, or the money that they get paid once they get it. So there's a connection between the educational piece as well as the pay that people need to have in order to be able to go into those settings. Our program even is looking at, as the state of Washington put in a program that was funded by one of their energy departments to look at how to creatively increase their early childhood workforce. And we're trying to emulate some of that in our program. But the most important thing is that people, number one, have to commit that that's what they want to do, because you can't have someone who goes into an early childhood learning program and then jump ship on you. So there has to be a commitment for people to be able to rely on those that are coming into that particular educational discipline. And it happens. I mean, people find that somebody's going to pay them more, they're going to go. But we've got to make sure that not only the competitiveness of wages, but I think that we all make sure the state of Louisiana needs to set a standard for what those wages should be for individuals to go in and then be able to come forward with programs on how they can get people into the educational pieces of being able to become an early childhood care worker.
Okay, set a standard for wages and a pipeline. That is a word. Does anyone else want to provide a response for that, or would you like me to move on to the? Okay, yes.
In that I am working in a school system where myself and other employees are there, and I hear that, and I mean, there's not a school in East Baton Rouge Parish that does not have vacancies probably, and but it's something that Representative Smith said is true, and that is commitment. And I think that when there's a commitment, that in many cases even trumps the difficulties as it relates to pay and support. So there's some people, you know, it's always multifaceted when it comes to the things on any job that person decides to leave, either the profession, the location, whatever. But it's usually a trichotomy of not just, but a pay, which may be the drawing, but also the support in the system and morale. And so for me, being not only in the educational system, but personally could say that, you know, if the pay may not be well, but I like what I'm doing, I have the support, I see a difference. That and yes, I do believe more money, but I'm still going to be there. It is, as in many cases, it's a public service. A public service in many cases is a calling that requires not only discipline, but also commitment. And it's in those things that we don't take for granted, or as it has been, where we have a tendency to not appreciate and pay fair and above fair wages to persons in the educational field. There's also, if you decide, and this is how I feel as for myself and my colleagues, that if you decide that you are going to be in this profession, you should do what you're supposed to do. You should do your due diligence as it relates to children, as it relates to parents, as it relates to the school system, because that is what you are paid to do, whether it's $1 or $1.50. You accepted that, you're getting paid, and it's for service. And we are losing generations of people when we have of children where there are disgruntled employees, and they actually do more by showing up than not. And that is because they aren't not being held to a standard of accountability that comes with a job that they're taking regardless of the pay. And so for me, we have to not be afraid to have those conversations. I'm in faculty meetings where when we talk about the different issues within our school system on our particular campus, it's always one-sided. For instance, we hear there are other way, like we talk about restorative justice. Thank you, Mayor Wayne. We talk about restorative justice, and when we talk about restorative justice, it's really where we have the children and the adults have a conversation to bring a mutual understanding on what happened. But we're still stuck in a thing where we just accept whatever the teacher said. And what that does is kill the entire spirit of the kid. So things like there are certain ways we've done things in the past where all of the concern is on the adult or the teacher, or because administrators are so afraid to have that vacancy or that absenteeism that they let things go. And something has to change as it relates to that. We have to have real conversations that if you show up, do the job, because you signed that paper that said it was 50 cents an hour, whatever. And so do it. Yeah, you deserve more. But in the meantime, you don't hurt 30 kids in a class because of those kind of issues and then you still accept the check deposited in the bank or whatever.
Thank you so much. And so that was probably going to be our last question, just because we're running a little bit behind. But to Councilwoman Banks' part, this is a calling and a passion. And so if it's a calling and a passion, we definitely want folks that have that calling and that passion, while simultaneously making sure that they are paid what they are worth and they are paid what things cost now and things like that. I know there's a couple of more questions in the chat, and we will probably try to answer you directly. There's one that says, Louisiana, does it have any teacher apprentice programs? And things like that. And we do have a few. And so, okay, and so we are going to I'm gonna turn it over to Billy so that he can introduce our next speaker. I would like to thank all of our elected officials for coming and giving us those powerful gems. Thank you so much. These are the elected officials, whether they're in office or used to be in office, that can help you and be a conduit to talking to other elected officials. It was just really easy. It's like talking to your homegirl. You see how easy it was? And so, and not just them and not just the elected officials that look like us, but all of them, because they were elected to represent everyone, not just some of us. Okay, Billy, take it over.
Thank you, Morgan, for that portion. The next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to get back to where we were on our run of show. We're going to be speaking with Devontae Lewis, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Budget Project. Devontae?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All righty. Well, hello, everyone. It's such an honor to join you today. And I'm just going to kind of briefly go over just some of the things that we know happen to make these issues better. One of the things that we work on at the Louisiana Budget Project, which is a policy research think and do tank, is about getting people involved in the policy-making decisions. Oftentimes we hear about policy after it has been developed, after somebody's already reported on it. And our job, we really believe that policy is better when we engage people and we get them in the system. And so a lot of the topics that we talked about today really start at the Louisiana legislature. That is where money for early childhood funding exists. That is where policy is. Dr. Davis talked about some of the challenges with the standards. A lot of it is because some members of the legislature have gotten involved and tried to use the legislative process. And so what I'm going to walk through briefly is just kind of some key dates, and then how you actually engage. And so this year, our legislature will start on April 10th at noon. And it will run all the way through June 8th till 6 p.m. And throughout there, you can see that members will start having most of their bills for the public to see them on the 31st of March. And then June 5th is the last day we'll start to see some major bills be passed. So that's kind of a brief timeline of what we're expecting in the legislature this year. So let's talk about how a bill becomes a law. So a lot of times we think about it. I mean, this is the same old thing we heard from a Schoolhouse Rock, that a bill really starts with someone drafting it and authoring it. Representative Smith used to be one of my go-to people all the time because I knew she would fight very hard for us on bills. But what happens is a bill starts in a chamber, it is introduced, and then it is given to a committee of jurisdiction. So for instance, almost all of early childhood, except for a lot of times when it has money, will go to the education committee. If it is primarily about funding, then it would go to what we call the appropriations committee, which handles a lot of our money bills. So that committee would then put it on the schedule for a day. That bill would be heard in the committee, and the committee can either vote it up, which would send it to the full body. They can vote it down, which will keep it in that committee, or they can let it go with no action. And so you can kind of see the three different items there. After that bill is then reported. That committee reports that bill to the full membership of the Senate, which we have 39 senators. Or in the House, we have 105 members. So after that, the bill is scheduled for a debate. And then it is either voted up or down by the chamber it started in. So if it starts in the Senate will take the first vote. If they vote for it, they will send it to the House. And as you see, the House would repeat the same strategy once again, and vice versa. Now, there is a little bit of a challenge sometimes. What happens when the chambers disagree? So for instance, that bill started in Chamber 1, but Chamber 2 put some amendments, or they changed some things on it. Then it goes back to the original body, and they can either accept those amendments and the bill becomes law, or they can deny those amendments and go to what's called a conference committee, where they get together and they work out the differences. And then after that, they produce a report, and both bodies can vote up or down that report. So it gets a little wonky, sometimes a little confusing, but trying to make it as clean and easy as possible. And then lastly, after that, the bill goes to the governor, and the governor can sign it. And he or she has a few days between passage to do that. He or she can veto the bill. And then if they veto the bill, it's sent back, and 2/3 of both bodies have to vote for it. Or the governor can do what has happened a lot of times, which is let the law go into effect without signing or vetoing it. So it's a way to showcase, I'm not approving, but I'm not fully disapproving of this law. So I'm just going to let it go into effect as it stands. And so that's really how the process of a bill becoming a law really works in Louisiana. So here's just some quick information about what's the face of Louisiana. So our state legislature is predominantly Republican, as you can see, even though we do have a Democratic governor. So it creates what we like to call a divided government, which means that one party does not control both branches and the executive branch. As you can see by our makeup, our legislature is very heavily male dominated. Actually probably has if my memory serves me correctly, we have the least amount of women elected to our state legislature than any other state. You can also see our racial breakdown. It is a little bit lower than where the population is. Black Louisianians are about 33%. of the overall state's population, but as you see in the respective bodies making up just shy of a quarter, or a little bit more of a quarter than that. So these dynamics are important because this tells you how decisions are being made, right? You think about that. So how can you go about reaching these individuals? And so as you can see, there is a QR code right there that would help you find your individual legislator, excuse me. But when you want to contact them, make a game plan, because as Representative Smith will tell you, it's very hard. There's a lot of constituents, there's a lot of industries that are a lot of interest. And because we do not pay our legislatures a full salary, and we do not give them enough money to have a full staff, getting them is very difficult sometimes, not because they want to be unresponsive, but because they simply don't have enough time. So we always say, make a plan for what you're going to contact your legislator for. Think about why you want to contact them. Is there a specific bill that you want them to vote yes or no on? If so, what is that story? What do you want to tell them about that in that phone call or that email? And then also write down a script for yourself so you don't forget your main points. Because sometimes if you have a legislator, in person, you probably only have like 5 minutes with them. So when you have those bullet points in those scripts, it's easy to do it. Sometimes in that email, when they are following up, or their legislative assistants following up, having those points listed in the email. So when they go and say, hey, Representative Smith, so-and-so reached out and they want to talk about HB 14 because they have concerns about there's not enough funding for early child care spots. Now, when they reach back out to you, you can have a more fruitful dialogue of what you really wanted to talk to them about. Call. I think sometimes legislators have phone numbers on their websites. Call, leave a voice message, leave it. You may not be able to speak to them directly, but you may get their legislative assistant or their aide, and you can leave that message the same way that you could do with an email. And then also email. Email is another way that you can do it. And do it, and then in person. This is what I was talking about. Legislators are typically in the State House in Baton Rouge on the days votes are happening. Even though they don't have offices in the Capitol, you can find them between committee hearings. You can leave them a note at their desk to step outside and speak to you. So you want to make sure that you've connected with them so they can be on the lookout for you, because this is the most important. And then also sometimes it's even better to meet them in the off season. Meet them when they are not really busy with legislative session. You'll see them at a community event, at a school. Go shake their hand, talk to them, say, hey, I want to sit down with you. So that real part from July to February or March is a great time to meet with your legislature, because they're not having to be at the Capitol every single day. And so here's some just tips, as we talked about earlier. Introduce yourself as a constituent. Explain why you're contacting them. You want to, if your goal is to persuade them, then really talk about why they should support or oppose something. And then always thank them. Thank them for their vote. Thank them for their support. Thank them for their service. And say, I look forward to working with you, and continue that dialogue. And so now let's talk about testimony really quickly. There are limited opportunities during the process where the public is able to go and say what they want. But when a bill is being heard, the public is allowed to provide a written statement ahead of time, or you can show up to the committee and testify in person. And both of these options go in the record, and they can be on down. And legislators love hearing from you. So if you have it, that's why the Power Coalition works very hard to make sure that people know when a bill is scheduled. If you can make it to Baton Rouge, come and tell your story in person, because legislators really like to hear that. And so providing testimony, I'm not going to kind of go through all of this, but normally you want to provide your testimony ahead of time. You will deliver your remarks at the witness table. Prepare it so you have it written down, and multiple copies available for the members of the committee, so you can be able to share your points very well with them. And this works the same way with written statements. You want to write it at least 24 hours Normally there's an email you can send it, but you can use it vice versa. And sometimes you can do both. You can do a written statement that may be a little bit longer and more detailed, and then come in and say little smart things. And so here are the best practices. If you have data, use it, but also say where you got that data from. Keep your short statements on the short side. What is the main takeaway that you want the legislator to do? When you're testifying, you want to be within 3 to 5 minutes, no longer than that, because that's when you start to lose people. Anticipate some questions that you may be asked. And the last thing is, do not argue with the members of the committee. Lay out your positions, but work on that. And so here are just the committees. I'm not going to go through them. They focus on a variety of issues. And so we will definitely work with you. Education, of course, is the one that you would mostly work with, but also appropriations if we're talking about funding. And these are just some basic notes that we'll share. I'm not going to go over these, just when you attend and how the committees operate. So that is how you get involved. And so I know we're running a little behind schedule, so I'm going to turn it back so y'all can get back to some of the questions and some of the engaging things that you wanted to ask about.
Cool. And as Morgan said, we are going to send out the recording. Everyone will get a copy of the PowerPoint. And so we're going to go ahead and close, y'all, because we want to be respectful of time. I want to thank everyone for joining today. I hope you learned something new today about how to contact your elected official, visit the state capitol, or engage as an advocate in your local community. We encourage you to contact your local and state elected officials to share your experiences as parents and advocate for affordable, high-quality early care and child education for our Louisiana families. There's so many different ways that you can get involved, from sending emails, making calls, to attending your local city council hearing, to going to Baton Rouge and visiting at the legislature or another elected body like Bessie, which we highly recommend. And if you ever want to refer back to the really incredible content our guests covered this evening or this afternoon, remember this training will be available on the video section of Louisiana